a place where you can combine romance, open world, and travel to other dimensions. A game in which you can plunge headlong into another reality and divide life into before and after. This is how you can describe the fantasy VR game called Chrono Life. And everything would be fine if another player in knight's armor hadn't insulted the hero by refusing to join the team. Another female sorceress participant tried to explain their refusal more politely, apologizing for her comrade, while a muscular man with scars on his shoulders stood behind and looked at the guy with disdain. And when all the members of the guild had already gone forward, even the little boy, holding a lollipop in his hand, could not help but laugh at the hero and his clothes. And so it was with every team John tried to join, so at some point he was left completely alone in the middle of the street. Having heard another refusal, the guy could not stand it, and swore loudly. Almost crying, the hero was angry at the game, at his poor equipment, and at the whole world. The other characters looked at him like he was crazy, and mocked him and his weak equipment. But John could not accept defeat, and hearing their words, shouted that they did not understand anything, and that weapons could not be useless if a lot of gold was spent on them. Suddenly, a girl from the crowd noticed his hysteria. The guy looked up at her only when she hesitantly tried to address him, coming closer. Lilith seemed to sparkle with her beauty and innocence, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot and holding a neat staff with her thin hands. John immediately blushed, looking the girl up and down, surprised that she even approached him and asked what she wanted. With a dazzling, sparkling smile, Lilith herself invited the hero to join her team. Grinning widely, John realized that this game was the best since it had such beauties. Some time passed, and the heroes were already walking through the forest, and Lilith was praising the guy, who giggled smugly at this. John proudly boasted that he spent most of his parents' allowance on gold bars in the game, which is why he has such equipment. And the girl began to admire him again, asking how much he had already improved. John promised meaningfully that she would definitely be surprised. The guy proudly added that he bought up all the beginner's sets for 55,000 won, as much as he could afford. With a gleam in his eyes, the hero showed off a sword from such a set. Lilith smiled dazzlingly. "Cool. You look just like a knight." At that moment, John felt as if lightning had struck him straight in the temple and in the soul. The guy went deep into himself, imagining daily walks together, smiles, laughter. How one day, surrounded by flowers, their tender first kiss in the game will happen. Or how he would one day kneel down in front of her, under the rays of the setting sun. John was already imagining how paintings in a gold frame with the happiest moments of their lives would hang on the snow-white wall of their shared home. And of course, as a little girl, she will meet him with her mother after work. Lost in his dreams, the guy was already thinking about what name he could give her. Lilith's steps suddenly stopped, interrupting the hero's lost thoughts. The girl said that they had come to the right place. It turned out to be an empty space in the forest, hidden by trees. The hero was surprised by this, looking around. There was a sudden clang of the sword as its blade passed through John. The guy immediately started coughing up blood, shocked by what was happening. His base health stats instantly began to decrease. The hero fell onto the grass with a crash. Shocked, he tried to comprehend what was happening, breathing heavily as the iron taste grew stronger in his mouth. A bright red pool of blood was already forming behind him. He asked hoarsely, "For what?" trying to make out Lilith's expression. When the guy suggested that it was his weapon, a sly grin appeared on her face. The girl smiled as if nothing had happened, saying that the hero could keep this trash for himself. John was amazed by her words, not understanding if this was the same cutie that was 5 minutes ago. And Lilith added in the same tone that she lured him into the forest, away from prying eyes, in order to kill him. The guy, shocked, recalled that the girl had invited him to join the team, and she answered with a smile that she lied, because she didn't need someone like him on her team. As if trying to finish him off, she unashamedly called him a poor loser. John's face was unreadable, but it was clear that her words had hit him harder than a sword to the stomach. Lilith continued that since the hero is scraping bottom even in the game, then in life, most likely, he is the same, and it is unlikely that he would not be afraid to approach her outside the game. When the girl sarcastically added that the guy's parents were also poor, his gaze darkened with anger. John clenched his teeth. Slowly, on trembling legs, he rose from his knees. In a hoarse but firm voice, he quietly said, "Enough." And a second later, his face and his eyes filled with anger as he hissed that she had crossed all boundaries. Suddenly, Lilith cut his body in half, not letting him finish. Drops of blood stained her from head to toe. The girl only snapped at his words. The hero coughed up a rag of blood as he fell to the ground. His body parts flew in different directions. At this time, the system's voice announced that Lilith had fulfilled the conditions and was eligible to move to the hidden class. The pink strands instantly turned black, starting from the ends. The neat black short dress began to transform after them, along with her staff. So it became long and white, and the staff increased in size and changed in design. Snow-white wings spread out behind her, feathers flying in all directions. The system announced that the transition was complete, and Lilith became the goddess of life. A sweet, satisfied smile touched her lips. With a charming expression, the girl rejoiced that she had finally reached 1,000 victims. She stretched as if nothing had happened, pleased with her success. Then the girl easily stepped over the hero's upper body in her white heels. She moved further and further away, glad that now she only had the main quest left. Barely keeping his eyes open as drops of blood framed his mouth, the boy realized the terrible truth about this game. It was the law of the jungle. He closed his eyes in exhaustion as the system announced that his character had died. After some time, the system's voice is heard in a small alley, informing that the hero has lost most of his experience and will be reborn in a safe place. The guy was completely reborn again, but there was no joy in his eyes. He remembered Lilith's words about him being a beggar, that he himself would never approach her outside the game. He gritted his teeth in resentment and anger. John also remembered the knight who had rudely refused him, and then about the child who made fun of him and his clothes. For several minutes the guy stood silently, his head down, and then he began to cry uncontrollably because the little he had was also taken away from him, and even his pride was trampled. Wiping away crocodile tears, the hero reached into his pocket. John pulled out a craftsman's hammer, which improves a piece of equipment by 1. Then he pulled out the knight's sword with 3 units. With furious determination, the boy swung his weapon. When the hammer reached the sword, a halo of dust and magic surrounded the hero. The boy gritted his teeth, realizing that the best way to become stronger was to improve his equipment. The system indicated that this could not be done when the sword was broken in half. John's face was a mixture of anger and shock, but he couldn't stop himself. Following the sword, the guy pulled out bloody iron braces. After the hammer blow, nothing was left of them either, and now all his weapons lay like a pile of rubbish around him. The hero's lips stretched into a smile, in a strained smile, because from the loss of part of the set, he automatically loses the entire set, and therefore the clothes. A hopeless, stingy tear rolled down his cheek as John once again realized that he didn't like the game. Then a club fell at his feet with a thud. It was a beginner's weapon, and at her current level it was almost useless. The hero looked up in surprise to see who had given it to him. A character in the most basic clothes with an unchanging smile on his face waved at him. The player continued to wave, and the boy raised an eyebrow, surprised by his strange behavior. Judging from his nondescript appearance, John realized that he was a fellow newcomer. The guy glanced down at the stick again. He couldn't believe it, but apparently this character was giving the weapon to him. The player gave a thumbs up, flashing his heroism, and the hero felt like an even bigger loser, realizing that this newbie simply took pity on him, seeing him in his underwear while the character was saying goodbye. For a few minutes after, John sat next to the stick, not daring to even look at it. Then he looked at the club with a glimmer of hope. Without thinking, the guy hit it with a hammer, and the system notified that his weapon had been improved by 1 unit of additional damage. The hero struck the club again, and the system's voice again confirmed the improvement in the level. A look of sadness crossed his face at the thought that such mechanisms were always being put into completely useless objects. But then he banged the tree against the tree a couple more times, hearing the equipment improving. The additional damage of the baton was now plus 64. John swung again, thinking that the club would soon break anyway, and the higher the level, the higher the probability of breakage. So he continued to hit the stick over and over again, over and over again. The city was already illuminated by the setting sun. The hand that the guy held the hammer in ached from tension and fatigue, although he himself sat and was covered in sweat, shaking from head to toe. The hero bit his lower lip. With one last sharp movement he swung and struck the club. A golden haze surrounded him, and the system again said that the equipment had been improved. The club sparkled in a golden glow with a new maximum status. Level 99. With a trembling hand, John picked up the weapon, examining it in surprise. He wondered, how could a simple stick reach level 99? This was impossible, because after the 10th time, The probability of success of each subsequent improvement decreases by 5%. At this point, the club slipped out of his hands. John tried to catch the slippery stick with trembling fingers. Finally, he grabbed it firmly with both hands, but the tip barely touched the ground. At that moment, the stones under the guy flew up, and he himself opened his mouth in shock. Dust, boards, pieces of tiles, stones, everything was scattered around. The earth itself was divided into 2 parts. Along with it, the planet was cut in half. And after that, the wave moved further, causing a huge explosion in the solar system. A moment later, the boy sat silently just a couple of centimeters from the destroyed ground. John screamed in fright, gradually realizing what had just happened. The players came running to the noise, also trying to understand what had happened. Some even thought it was a dragon attack. People ran in panic towards the destruction, running around John, unaware that he was the one causing it. The hero himself still sat in a stupor and looked ahead, unable to say a word. The continent in front of him split in 2 in a matter of moments. On that day, a new world record in VR gaming was entered into the Guinness Book of Records. The system notified John that his reputation had been increased due to the player's murder, and when such notifications started appearing again and again, it became clear that the world record was for the number of players killed with 1 hit. The guy realized what was happening, because the notification sound did not stop. A wide grin appeared on his face, although that was all that was visible due to the setting sun. John remembered Lilith's words about his parents and his unsuccessful life. The hero continued to chuckle, his grin turning into a victorious grin. He remembered how he would pay with his life for his knowledge. Then, through my own experience, I learned about the essence of the game. The hypocrisy and cruelty of other players came to mind. This is how John learned that the law of the jungle applies in this game. The guy sat with an unreadable face, holding a baton in his hands. She was glowing with her level 99 gold status, and the hero's face shone with anger and a desire to take revenge on his offenders. In reality, the guy was a nobody. Of unprepossessing appearance, of average height, he did not excel in either his studies or sports. If we were to describe his life in gaming terms, his level would be Bronze 4. The sun rose over the city again. There was a quiet rustling of bare feet on the ground. John walked slowly across the town square, wearing only his raincoat and underwear. Now something has changed in him. Suddenly he bumped shoulders with a heavy-set player. The big guy turned to the guy with insults. He grabbed the hero by the chest with his large, rough hand. The man shouted that the boy was blind, and his wife, suddenly appearing behind him, smirked that John could be left alone. He was already scared. The guy didn't react to their words in any way. Here, in the game, he was different. Suddenly, the hero quietly called the player a pig's snout. The big guy clearly didn't expect this from a weak-looking loser. The man began to scream and tightened his grip, but the club had already reached his cheek. He was taken aback, noticing out of the corner of his eye a tree near his cheek. Anger appeared on his face again. The big guy yelled that the hero wouldn't do anything to him with his useless stick. But at that moment, he was prevented from finishing his sentence by a shockwave from the useless stick, knocking out his jaw. At first, the man, engulfed in golden light, flew to the side. Then the golden beam headed straight into space, where the big guy also flew. His wife recoiled in fear, and dust rose in a column around her. But John had already turned to her, his club ready. The weapon fit perfectly in his hand, as if it had been created for this very moment. Here John was invincible. In this game, he is the main character. The smug smile and the fire of revenge in his eyes never left his face. Suddenly the system notified that the weapon's durability had dropped sharply. The club's durability level was now only 3 out of 5. The hero looked at the club in surprise. Sometime later, John sat alone in front of the weapon in that very alley, his knees pulled up to his chest. Indignation and sadness from the inevitability mixed on his face. The status of the stick showed that due to its low durability, it would break after a couple of hits. The guy continued to stare at the club, hoping for a miracle. Then he sadly plopped down on the ground, gradually realizing that he only had 3 hits left, since he had only made 2, and his durability was down to 3/5. John continued to lie on the cold ground, looking at the sky. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he wasn't in the best position right now. He looked at the sun through the roofs of the houses, realizing his hopelessness. The hero really wanted to take revenge on those who laughed at him, and even more so to deal with Lilith. He looked at the sky for a few more minutes. Suddenly, John clenched his teeth in anger. The guy jumped to his feet in one movement. The hero whispered that he still had 3 hits. An unexpected determination appeared in his eyes again. A gloomy place full of skeletons and sharp rocks. The Valley of the Dead. John stepped forward, stepping on another skull, although the entire road was paved with them. His expression was unreadable, but there was definitely no fear there. The hero muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Suddenly, some kind of lilac glow appeared from behind the rocks. The guy turned around at some noise in that direction. His face was covered with a shadow of determination. Suddenly, John was surrounded by columns of dust. Huge purple eye lights sparkled out of the darkness. The terrifying 2-headed dragon appeared in all its glory. The entire cave shook from the menacing roar of both heads. But the hero looked at him imperturbably. As the game's strongest boss swung his huge paw, he creaked in a creepy voice. "Insignificant mortal." The beast moved towards the guy, squealing loudly that he had crossed the line of the dead. Rocks crumbled, skulls flew from side to side, but John stood his ground when the system explained that in front of him was the 2-headed dragon Eurus. The monster approached the guy, shouting that this place was the line between life and death. The dragon cried out that the hero was a fool and was now doomed to eternal torment. But at that moment he was abruptly cut off by a golden light from John's club. A moment later, only a trace remained of the monster's head. The beast looked at his missing part with surprise, and the hero picked up the club from the place where the force of the blow had formed a black hole. John whispered quietly that he only had 3 hits left. The dragon looked at the absolutely calm guy in shock. At that moment, the system announced that John had 2 hits left, and he thoughtfully scratched his back with his baton. And then he shouted, looking threateningly at the monster, that he would kill it if its strength was not enough for more. The beast recoiled in fear. The dragon immediately began to beg the guy to wait. John continued to scratch his back, looking at the monster skeptically. The beast begged the hero to let him speak and call him boss. John skeptically asked if Eurus had just called him a fool, to which the beast immediately began to justify himself, saying that according to the plot, he was obliged to say this. The dragon swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his mouth. The beast asked who the hero was anyway. To this, John grumbled that Eurus should not bother him. He would kill the dragon anyway. Not giving the beast a choice, the guy swung his club. Everything around was illuminated with a golden glow. The monster roared, flying back. With a crash, the dragon fell onto the skeletons. He was breathing heavily, blood flowing into a pool from his huge mouth. John clicked his tongue in irritation, and Eurus, as if he had learned the whole essence of existence, was unable to rise. The club's durability was now only 1/5, meaning the hero only had 1 hit left. John sighed, frustrated that he couldn't do anything about the durability. The monster heard this, and it dawned on him. Eurus hopefully offered to inhabit John's weapon. The hero scratched the back of his head with his club, realizing that the dragon could have deceived him. Then he asked again what the dragon meant. Suddenly, the guy received a notification about a pact in which Eurus voluntarily gives him his soul. John didn't know whether to accept the task from the system. Taking advantage of the guy's confusion, Eurus asked if he had heard anything about ego swords. The hero didn't know about this and asked for clarification. Eurus muttered that it would take a long time to explain, to which John asked to be brief. Then the beast said that he would inhabit the hero's weapon. He explained that the weapon would thus have a soul and would evolve into an ego sword. But when the dragon added that to all this there would also be infinite durability, the hero had an idea. Eurus assured that the ego sword was the most powerful weapon in chronolife, and John suddenly giggled. Then a loud laughter echoed throughout the cave, bouncing off the walls. The dragon laughed awkwardly along with him. He tried to ask if his boss agreed with the proposal, while the guy continued to laugh uncontrollably. Having calmed down, John muttered that he had changed his mind about taking revenge, and then he grinned evilly, seeing how much the game wanted him to do it. Eurus trembled with fear when he saw the crazy expression on the hero's face, and mentally asked his mother to take him away from there. With a wide grin, John clicked the accept button, and the system responded that the quest was accepted. Suddenly, a huge purple pentagram appeared below him. The pentagram stretched out under Eurus, and the lilac light spread throughout the cave. Gradually, the huge dragon wings began to disappear. When the dragon itself dissolved into the program codes, the system announced that Eurus's physical body had disappeared. A purple glow enveloped the club, as the system's voice confirmed that the monster's soul had entered the weapon. From then on, the baton's status was highlighted in purple. The weapon's class became Ego, and its durability was infinite. A wide grin spread across John's face, but before he could celebrate, he heard rustling sounds. Monsters from all corners climbed straight towards the hero. They shouted that their master demanded revenge. Loud roars and cries of "Revenge! Revenge!" could be heard from everywhere. While the beast cried out for retribution, John stood motionless, not even moving. The army of Urus, mingling together, stood like a wall, and in front of them the hero looked very small. The guy grinned evilly. "Well, then I will take revenge." For a second, the image of Lilith appeared in his memory. He raised his club up and shouted loudly, "Revenge!" echoing the cries of the dragons. The baton's beam once again hit the planet and reached space. At this time, the city, despite the serene sky, was also restless. The players crowded around a board with someone's face and the words "Wanted" written on it. Everyone understood that the wanted man was dangerous and were tense. The guard standing next to the board announced an SSS rank reward for the villain's head. People became even more tense when they heard that this villain had killed over 800,000 people in one day, which was the worst mass murder in the history of the game. The bounty notices for his head were spread throughout all 12 kingdoms, on all 3 continents. They were on every street, even the smallest one, on every corner. The guard announced that the reward was 1 trillion gold. The players whispered in shock, not believing in such a huge reward. Then the sound of marching footsteps was heard. Soldiers in golden armor with shields of the same color walked in a row. The players realized that these were not just knights. After all, each of their armors had the coat of arms of the royal guard engraved on it. People noticed the one who commanded them walking in the distance. The leader of the Golden Guild was a beautiful girl named Andrea. On the other side were soldiers in red cloaks with white crosses embroidered on them. The leader of the White Crosses Guild was Stanford, and his right eye bore scars reminiscent of his exploits. The army in caps and purple robes was already lined up in rows. The leader of the Holy Land Guild was the most powerful sorceress in the kingdom, Gloris. Following them, the Robin Hood Thieves Guild appeared, led by Duncan, and behold, the silver armor sparkled in the sun. Another army followed after the others. The blue flag fluttered in the wind. The knights with the azure coat of arms stepped aside to let the leader through. It was Hawkeye, the king of this country, who commanded the Guild of Justice. The players watched what was happening in amazement, because the 5 strongest guilds gathered in one place for the first time. The alliance of these 5 flags was the strongest alliance in the world. Hawkeye spoke up as the leader of the World Alliance. The knights of the 5 flags stood motionless, awaiting orders. The entire alliance listened in anticipation as he declared all-out war on the mass murderer of players, to the one whose face is imprinted on the arrest warrant. Meanwhile, John was studying the new club with its current characteristics. The guy looked at the weapon thoughtfully. Then he grinned, baring his teeth. His laughter echoed down the now familiar alley. Suddenly, Urus emerged from the weapon, glad that his boss was in a good mood, and the hero screamed in surprise. John was scared that someone's head was sticking out of his club, and asked what kind of creature was in front of him. The beast introduced itself as a 2-headed dragon. John was surprised when he looked at the little animal. He remembered the huge monster from the cave, and then he looked again at the little creature from the club. Urus reminded that he had already said, his soul will inhabit the hero's weapon. The little dragon added that this was a normal occurrence for weapons of the ego level, and only the hero could see and hear it, but the guy didn't listen very closely, being touched by the dragon's new form. John replied that he generally understood, but he was curious as to where the beast's second head had gone. At first Urus didn't understand what the question was about. Then he turned his head to the side and saw that an important body part was missing. And then he sadly asked where she really went. Then a piece of paper flew towards them. The hero picked up the leaflet that had flown away. His face was emblazoned in the center with a huge sign about the reward. To say that he was surprised is to say nothing. And looking at the sky, the hero saw that there were thousands of these leaflets, on the walls of any building, everywhere where people walked. His face was in every available place. Urus immediately squealed in delight. The beast circled around John, praising his boss that there was no way a dragon could kill 800,000 people with one blow. Urus rejoiced that they would even give real money for the hero, a whole trillion. At this time John asked, while chewing chicken, if NPS like Urus could say anything about real money, since they don't know about it. To this the little animal replied that he didn't care, he was already in the next world. Urus changed the subject to the hero, asking what he planned to do since they would hunt him day and night. The little beast asked in a terrifying tone, "Shouldn't we deal with humanity right now, boss?" The guy thought, continuing to chew. He looked again at the fallen leaflets. John chuckled as he looked at his portrait. The hero chuckled maliciously, thinking how cool it really was to feel like a celebrity, and Urus tensed up again. The guy calmed down and said with a smile that he would act according to the LPS principle. Urus naturally asked what he was talking about. The hero explained that this is a technique where a very powerful and strong character pretends to be weak and harmless. The beast asked why John should tolerate being treated like a loser, ignored and despised, to which the guy replied with a smile, "You don't understand anything." He added that it's cool when no one around knows that the person in front of them is not just a weakling, but the main character of the game. John continued to say that he would enjoy a peaceful life in the game, when suddenly an arrow pierced his back. Urus looked at this in shock, unable to say a word. The arrow passed through the boy's body, and its tip sparkled on the other side. A bloody cough escaped his throat. The guy fell flat on the ground. Urus shouted in panic, "Boss!" and flew up to the hero. The blue case was still full of glittering arrows. The next one has already been pulled onto the bowstring. Hawkeye stood on the roof of one of the buildings, and behind him was a huge army of the Justice Guild. It was he who shot these arrows. The sound of knights' footsteps could be heard from afar. The menacing march could be heard from the other side as well. The hero lay motionless on the road. In a moment he was surrounded by a huge army, led by the king. Hawkeye ordered John to be captured and imprisoned. The guy continued to lie there, unable to move. The knights shouted in one voice, "It will be done!" The frightened dragon tried to bring the hero to his senses, shouting that people, although weak, in such numbers would definitely defeat him. Meanwhile, the knights were getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the guy sat up, coughing up blood again. First, John got down on one knee, and then, on trembling legs, he rose completely. The army tensed, preparing their weapons. Hawkeye shouted that there would be no mercy for the villain. The knights rushed to attack. Urus continued to nervously fly around his boss, and John gritted his teeth and hissed, "I've changed my mind." With a sharp jerk, he pulled the arrow out of himself. The guy threw it aside as if nothing had happened. His free hand gripped his baton tightly. Looking at all the players who were against him, the hero concluded that he no longer liked living by the LPS principle. A wide, sinister grin spread across his face as he shouted that they had asked for it. A golden beam pierced the solid ground, and along with it, part of the army. The golden light also engulfed Hawkeye, who opened his mouth in surprise. The flash of the impact once again reached the universe. People, like bugs, spread out on the ground. The leader was breathing heavily, unable to rise. He couldn't believe that just one blow had caused him so much damage. All the buildings in this place were razed to the ground, not to mention the people. Inexpressible horror passed over the king's face. The capital of the First Kingdom was destroyed in one fell swoop. The hero had already approached the Hawk's Eye. The man tensed even more, and John walked calmly and waddlingly over the soldiers' bodies. Hawkeye began to rummage through his inside pocket. He suddenly pulled out a one-use summoning crystal that would summon any number of players to help him. Without further ado, the king smashed the ball in his fist, and its fragments began to glow with a blue light. A blue pentagram surrounded the man, creating a cylindrical barrier around him. There were more and more of these pentagrams. They surrounded John. Hawkeye called out to all members of the United Forces Guild. The blue glow grew brighter as the system announced a mass teleportation of players. Hordes of new soldiers appeared inside the pentagrams in an instant. There were more and more of them. John looked around, realizing he was surrounded again. Meanwhile, the knights gradually surrounded him. The guy now had nowhere to run. The Guild of United Forces was huge. There are approximately 3 million of them in total, and all of them teleported to the battlefield at once. The king pointed his finger at the hero. Then he shouted, "Charge the villain!" People rushed towards John without question. The guy sighed without moving from his spot. With a sharp movement, he swung his club. A golden streak pierced and divided the earth. The soldiers, along with the strongest generals, fell powerlessly from the beam's effects. Urus looked at this picture in amazement. John swung his club again. A gust of air followed her, and another shockwave passed through the guild. Urus became more and more stunned. He remembered shouting that people were weak, but not when they were in large numbers. The simple truth dawned on the dragon. Even if Urus is the strongest boss in this world, he is not able to defeat all players at the same time. He could only defeat such elite warriors from all over the world by summoning his own army. That's why he was sure that it was better to get out of there, but John was stronger. The warriors in red armor now sharpened their swords. The general was more confident of his victory than ever, despite the heavy losses. The red crosses pounced on John, but he did not react. And even when the blades glittered right above his head, the guy didn't move. John flashed a grin and pulled the baton out from his bosom again. The golden light pierced through another batch of enemies. It spread even further, dividing the continent again. At this time, the most powerful witch whispered a spell into her purple staff. She was guarded by magicians, located in another blue pentagram. John took notice of this. Suddenly, a new pentagram appeared above his head, and Glorus cast a spell of ancient destructive magic. The pentagram swirled in the air. John watched this with surprise, and just a second later, a huge magical beam from the pentagram suddenly headed straight at him. John muttered under his breath that the spell sounded really cool. Illuminated by the beam, the guy added that he would also need a spell for his attacks. John pulled the club from behind his back again. The power of the weapon once again pierced the planet, and with it the solar system, and the name of this technique was Annihilation. In the middle of the pentagram there was only a hole and a light haze around the edges, and then her sides began to crack, and suddenly the whole structure shattered like a mirror. The girl screamed, realizing that her ancient spell was broken. She called over the royal mages, preparing to give the command. But then they noticed John raising his stick above his head. The hero said quietly but firmly, "Blow." A golden glow pierced the space from the earth to the sky, and the magicians also flew off in different directions. John was fighting alone against 3 million people, and while it wasn't exactly spectacular, it was definitely a disaster for the players. The entire guild of United Forces was completely defeated. Hawkeye sat among a pile of lifeless bodies. He was shaking, his breathing was ragged, and his heart was pounding in his temples. The man muttered the same thing under his breath, not believing that such a thing was even possible. And John had already approached him, blocking the sun. The guy said he wouldn't kill him, even though he was the one who made him lose his temper. Hawkeye asked why in surprise. At this the hero sighed with a smile, and he reminded the man that it was Hawkeye who shot him with a bow. The king was frightened. Tears sprang to his eyes, but at that moment the club had already touched his jaw. As expected, the battle was on everyone's lips. This situation interested even those who don't play games at all. The hero stood among a mountain of dead people on the half-destroyed land of a once beautiful continent. The club glittered in the setting sun. The guy frowned, looking at the weapon. Finally, Eurus emerged from the stick, rejoicing that his boss had been great, and John was relieved that the dragon had not disappeared. Suddenly the sound of snow-white heels was heard. The guy turned around at the sound. The female silhouette approached John with calm grace. The hero was surprised that someone else remained alive. He started to say how annoying it was, but suddenly the girl's familiar features became clear in his eyes. They stood opposite each other, illuminated by the orange light of the sunset. It was Lilith herself. For a few seconds John stood in a stupor. Then his surprise turned to anger. At this a slight smile touched her lips. She said in a charming tone, "Long time no see, Mr. Loser." The sun was setting over an endless expanse strewn with the bodies of 3 million people. Countless swords and spears were scattered across the ground. The hero thought that his second meeting with this girl was quite fateful. Her taunts came back to me again. The hand holding the club trembled with anger. John clenched his teeth, the veins in his neck standing out. But for some reason at that moment he felt like laughing. They stood facing each other for a few more moments. Lilith asked him how he was doing with a charming smile. She also noted that she certainly didn't expect to meet him in such circumstances, but fate itself brought them together. The guy replied with a crooked smile that he understood perfectly well. She was looking for him with the intention of killing him. The girl smiled slightly. "Is that what you think of me?" she asked, almost affectionately. The hero frowned again, her calmness getting on his nerves. He then said that he would have split her skull open right there, but he had questions. He looked at the girl, and then asked why her hair was a different color. Lilith giggled, glad that he noticed. She recalled that killing a hero in the past was a sacrifice that helped her enter a new hidden class, the Goddess of Life. I remembered her transformation and the phrase about the long-awaited 1,000 victims. Lilith lost with a lock of hair, explaining that this was the reason why her hair color changed. John listened carefully to all this. Then the guy sighed, not reacting in any way. The baton was already pointed towards the girl. John asked why she was the goddess of life and not death, even though she sacrificed 1,000 players. But his threatening gesture did not bother her at all. She smiled wider, replying that it was indeed funny. "You'll die laughing," John hissed furiously. He slammed his club down on the ground where she was, but Lilith had already flown up. John hissed that he had his answers, and now it was time to teach her a lesson. Lilith asked, a little disappointed, "Why so quickly?" And a new blow pierced the earth in its place. The hero stood on the destroyed land, among smoke and dust. He looked up, looking for where she had flown to again. "What a pity," the girl exclaimed through the dust. The guy shuddered, realizing that she was behind him, and the girl added that she would like to talk some more. He ran furiously towards her, clutching a weapon in his hand. Another blow from the club passed along the ground, and the golden light took the girl with it. The ground in that place split in half. Urus cried out in delight that it was a direct hit. The dragon was sure that now his master had caught this slippery herring. John chuckled that people like her only knew how to bluff. But then a silhouette with a staff appeared from the fog again. The hero's eyes widened in surprise. In the huge hole left by the blow from the stick stood a completely unharmed Lilith. She smiled and admitted that the guy had become much stronger, but it is impossible to defeat her with this club. Urus, in fear, pressed himself against his master's face, John screaming that the girl had survived even after that. While the hero tried to remove the dragon from himself, the girl looked at it motionless. She was no longer smiling, but she looked very intently. And then Urus noticed her gaze. He couldn't believe it, but it seemed she saw him, although no one except the owner could. Finally, the hero tore the dragon away from himself and returned to the conversation. He was sure he had hit her right, but there wasn't a scratch on her. The girl replied that she was the goddess of life, and he was a mere mortal. He will never kill the goddess. The guy took the information calmly. Scratching the back of his head with a stick, he said with a smile that he was incredibly angry, and he suddenly ran up to her again. John swung his club furiously. He approached her in a matter of seconds. But there was a deathly calm on the girl's face. There was a loud roar from the impact force. The boy swung his stick again, and again the earth was pierced by a blow. The hero did not stop his lightning-fast strikes. The explosion reached the solar system, piercing the planet through and through. Urus watched this from a distance, but the tremors of the earth were hard to miss. The dragon was afraid that at this rate his boss would destroy the entire planet. But Lilith didn't care. The fog and dust cleared and she spread her wings. The condescending smile never left her face. The girl flew above the hero, showing that she was always one step ahead. John was starting to get tired of this. He was breathing heavily, clearly tense. Lilith's snow-white wings spread out again, and a moment later they began to disappear, leaving behind a trail of feathers. The girl landed smoothly. The sight of her neat heels contrasted sharply with the ruined ground. With a smile, she assumed that John missed her madly, thought about her, dreamed of revenge. The girl, clicking her heels, came closer and closer. Lilith assured that no matter how much time passed, no matter how hard he tried to become stronger, the guy would not be able to kill her. Her face was inches from his as she finished the sentence with a venomous smile. John frowned and closed his eyes. The guy sighed boredly. He turned around demonstratively. His steps gradually moved away from her. Lilith asked if he was giving up so easily. John didn't react to this in any way, but only began to warm up his right hand with the baton. A few minutes later, he replied that he was trying to see how much force he could put into a blow to break through. The girl smiled and again reminded him that he couldn't kill her. But John interrupted mid-sentence, adding that he would be breaking through the planet, not her. His answer even seemed to intrigue the girl. He turned to her and asked with an almost insane grin, "Since I can't defeat you, maybe I should destroy this planet." Finally, the smile disappeared from her face. She quietly said that his train of thought was interesting. But could a mere mortal like him do something like that? He replied that this is precisely why he calculates the force of the blow. He remembered that he had hit the ground many times today, but all these blows were far from full force. Lilith tensed even more, a shadow of anger appearing on her face. She asked if the guy had taken into account that he would die with her, especially since he himself was mortal. Her question about whether he was ready to die for revenge stirred up old grievances in him. John has already paid with his life for knowing the laws of this world. He suddenly chuckled softly. Again I remembered the beginning of his journey through insults and rejection, and the quiet giggling turned into uncontrollable laughter. The hero learned the law of the jungle from his own bitter experience. Having finished laughing, he continued speaking. His motivation was not simply blind revenge. But someone like you can't understand, the hero concluded. Yes, it would be revenge that would lead to his own demise. But he had nothing to lose in the first place, and even less so when the club was over his head. Lilith visibly tensed, not expecting such determination. She tried to stop him by taking a couple of steps back. But John had already raised his hand above the ground, intending to finish what he had started. The end of the club touched the floor with a rustling sound. Everything around shook. The earth seemed to be splitting at the seams. Finally, fear appeared on Lilith's face. Urus also flew out of the club in horror, and on the hero's face there was a mad, victorious grin. The force of his blow literally cut through the ground like a watermelon. In an instant, it swallowed the entire planet, and a moment later the planet turned into a glowing ball. Before it exploded into 1,000 pieces, the blast wave illuminated everything around. The light was so bright that it was reflected even in the darkness of the solar system. It was incredibly blinding and equally terrifying. Suddenly, a wall of binary code appeared in place of the planet. Meanwhile, in the real world, in the game capsule building, the huge blue hall of VR capsules, as always, worked continuously in silence and tranquility. Only one man sat among the capsules with a bored look. Someone's obscene language caught his attention. Players climbed out of their capsules one after another, cursing that they had been kicked out of Chronolife. They were all puzzled as to why they had been thrown out. And then everyone turned to that same admin, intending to get answers to the curses. In response, the admin tried to calm them down. He explained that the problem was not with him or with electricity. One player suggested that there was a problem with the server, to which others responded with skepticism. Suddenly, one guy received a notification about an update on the game page. The creators reported that there was indeed a technical error on the server, and promised to fix it, and later explain what the cause was. However, one capsule was still working. A man's silhouette and the words "occupied" were visible on it, and in the game there was still a wall of binary code. The system was rebooting, counting players and identifying them. After some manipulation, the system's voice announced that there was only one player in the game. At this time, John stood among the cells and digital codes. The guy looked around in amazement, wondering where he was. The hero took a couple of steps forward in space. He scratched the back of his head in confusion, as if remembering that he was not here. "ST-389, came a voice from behind. Someone in yellow slippers approached the hero, adding that this was the name of the planet he had destroyed. The stranger came closer, saying that it was one of the most beautiful planets in the fourth universe. The man did not react to the hero's skeptical reaction, but added that it was his mother's favorite planet. John frowned as he looked at the stranger, and after a few seconds he asked who was in front of him. "Me?" the man asked mysteriously. He was silent for a few moments. Then he smiled broadly. And then, with a mad grin, he introduced himself as the creator. John was silent for a while, but he exhaled with a smile, not at all embarrassed by the expression on his interlocutor's face. "The creator is the creator," he replied, before asking if the man had seen a dark-haired girl there. To this, the stranger replied that there was no one else except the two of them, which amazed the hero. Here John received a notification that there was only one player on the server, and the creator added that the guy killed everyone himself. And finally it dawned on the hero, no one would have survived such a large-scale explosion. And when the man added that there was no one left alive, John chuckled. The stranger was taken aback, not understanding such a reaction, and the hero laughed uncontrollably. He exulted. Revenge, raising his club above his head. While the guy continued to rejoice, the stranger still stood in a stupor. John then turned to Eurus, wanting to share with him the joy of the revenge that had been accomplished. But the stick in his hand showed no signs of life. The hero began to curse, trying to pull the dragon out. The stranger again spoke up, saying that there were only two of them. John looked at him and frowned. The man added that the animal was not with them either. The guy skeptically asked who was in front of him, if there was only one player on the server. The hero asked whether he was an NPS or a developer. The man began to answer that he was neither, but suddenly a blur appeared in his throat, and instead of a voice, a machine-like crackle was heard. The creator continued to speak through the crackling noise, and it was impossible to hear him. Then he sighed with a smile. As if nothing had happened, the man scratched the back of his head and said that there was already interference. Here the space under the heroes began to disappear. John looked down in confusion. The man added that it was a shame to say goodbye so quickly, but it was nice to meet him. He then waved and asked me to say hello to someone named Furry. John opened his mouth in shock, trying to stop him. But at that moment the space disappeared even more, blurring the stranger. Everything around disappeared under the bright light. And then the cells began to crumble and fall like shards of a mirror. The system's voice announced that the hero had been kicked out of the game. The wall of endless code appeared again. It was still quiet in the VR room. Only the hero's capsule showed signs of life. The door gradually began to open, filled with steam. With a distinctive click, the door opened completely. John took off his VR glasses. He was clearly very irritated. "Why did you even show up if you didn't say anything?" The guy was indignant. John continued to grumble, not noticing that there was a man sitting opposite him, surrounded by bodyguards. The man kept looking at John through his dark glasses and smoked an expensive cigar. Suddenly he stood up, revealing an expensive white suit. The blonde walked towards John, followed by his bodyguard. Walking slowly forward, the man said the hero's exact age, name, and how much time he spent in the game. The guard stood like a wall when the stranger added that the guy's favorite weapon was a level 99 baton. As he checked to see if everything was correct, his massive figure loomed menacingly over John. The guy answered in the affirmative with a trembling voice and asked who was in front of him. The man slowly took off his sunglasses, and then, with a dangerous flash of his blue eyes, he replied that he was the one who had come for his club. John is a 21-year-old college student and a fan of the game Chrono Life. During his entire playing career, he never rose above the amateur level, but he was lucky and was able to upgrade a regular club to level 99+. Then he was able to take revenge on everyone he didn't like, and even to this sweet-looking lady. He dealt with her best of all. Along with it, the planet was also destroyed. Then someone appeared who called himself the Creator. Although he disappeared as suddenly as he came,